So I started my day today reading through comments that people posted on the newly announced balance changes to the multiplayer version of StarCraft 2, and let me tell you, people are salty. I mean, it's only 9 AM over here in the Netherlands, and I'm pretty sure I've already reached my sodium intake for the day. It's bad. I mean, people always get upset whenever there are any new balance changes, but I feel like it's particularly bad this time around. So, I'll go ahead and post a link to this blog post down below in the comment section, or rather the description of this video as well, so you can read along if you want to. And, well, since it's a very long list and we're gonna read through all of it, you could probably treat this video more or less like a podcast, maybe play some games in the meantime yourself, or just put me on your second monitor if you have one, or maybe just in the background, as there's going to be a lot of reading involved. And I'm going to try and give you my initial impressions before obviously testing any of this in-game in this video. So keep in mind, obviously a lot of this will be experimental, and I'm not going to be able to give you the exact changes that those will probably have in the game, because that's going to require a lot of testing. But at the very least, I'm going to be able to give you a little bit more backstory to what most of these changes are supposed to do. Alrighty, so here we go. Hey everyone, each year we take a step to evaluate what improvements we could make to the game for a post-BlizzCon design patch. As we come closer and closer to stability with each passing year, for 2019 we'll be focusing more on tweaks and refinements to existing units. Some themes in this year's patch include introducing new upgrades designed to gate the full power of certain units and improve late game usage for others, and then strategically reducing ranges of key units and abilities to encourage greater interaction in the late game. Before we start, please bear in mind that this update contains many experimental changes that we'd like to try and test, and we'll do our best at highlighting which ones we're especially wary of. Alrighty. Now, obviously, this is going to be to the 1 versus 1 and then the 2 versus 2 and 3v3 and 4v4 experience to StarCraft 2. One thing I've noticed is that a lot of people online are very upset because they live under the assumption that a lot of these changes will actually affect their game directly. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? A lot of these changes obviously will have an impact in the regular games that you and me will play on the ladder, but the vast majority of these changes are catered to the very highest level of play. Right? So some of these changes obviously will have an impact on your ladder games, but for the most part, I mean, I feel like these are all relatively minor. They're not necessarily as massive of a set of changes like we saw a couple years ago with, for example, like the release of Legacy of the Void, right? I mean, they added new units to it and all that. It's not gonna impact the game nearly as much. So let's take everything with a grain of salt and let's discuss the game as if we are all at the highest level of play, okay? I think that's probably a good way to look at it, and obviously, hopefully that's gonna allow us to get a bit of a better overview as well. So, first off, we have the Infernal Pre-Igniter upgrade. That's the blue flame upgrade for the Hellion and the Hellbat. The cost has been decreased from 150 to 100. In the summer of 2011, the legendary Slayer's Terran unleashed a revolutionary blue flame Hellion build upon hapless Zerg players. Are we gonna read this whole blog post like this? The balanced team had no choice but to act, cutting the bonus provided by the Infernal Pre-Igniter upgrade in half. Since then, the upgrade has acted more as a time gate to the Hellion Hellbat mid-game combat, rather than a core upgrade for the matchup defining openers. As such, we'd like to reduce the cost of the upgrade to encourage earlier and more meaningful Hellion Hellbat power spikes. I think this is very reasonable. Right now, we generally speaking don't really see the Infernal Pre-Igniter upgrade coming into play until, well, much later, when you basically have the resources to do so. Usually people want to make Hellions because they're like a nice stepping stone. They allow you to put on some pressure, they allow you to be safe as well. They allow you to get rid of some of those creep tumors. But the Blue Flame upgrade, I mean, it's pretty expensive. It cuts into your follow-up production quite a bit. So I like the fact that this is now a little bit cheaper. Makes a lot of sense. Secondly, we have the Thor. Now, this is one that people are already very divided on. So, high impact payload damage decreased from 40 plus 15 versus massive to 25 plus 10 versus massive. However, the high impact payload weapon cooldown decreased significantly as well. So, basically what this means is that Thors will be able to shoot more often, but every shot does less damage. A common complaint we've heard regarding the Thor is its ability to be controlled in late game fights. Because the Thor's anti-ground and anti-air attacks have such drastically different cooldowns, it can often feel unresponsive in these engagements. Thus, we'd like to try an experimental change that brings the high impact payload's cooldown to the same as that of its anti-ground weapon, the Thor's Hammer. The primary purpose of this change is neither to increase nor decrease the Thor's power, but rather to improve the responsiveness without hurting its fantasy. Okay, So what this means is that it's going to have less burst damage, but it's going to be more microable, right? I mean, I see a lot of people getting very upset about this because obviously it's gonna change the damage values just a little bit. But I always like it whenever a unit becomes more microable because that means that better players can get more value out of it, right? Because we view the lower burst damage to be slightly more impactful than a lower overkill potential, we'll also be slightly raising the DPS of the weapon to start off. Makes sense, right? So I do like this change overall. It's gonna make the Thor a little bit more powerful. I kind of feel like the Thor already is very powerful, but maybe that's a little bit of Zerg bias coming in from my perspective, because I do primarily play Zerg. There's no denying that there are a lot of counters to the Thor, but I think this makes it a little bit more similar to, say, for example, a Goliath, right? I mean, if they were to reduce the size of the Thor, it would pretty much be a Goliath at that point in the game, right? I mean, not quite, because, you know, it's still different. But, yeah, no, I do like this choice. Just making a Thor more of a microable unit sounds like a great idea to me. Secondly, we have the Viking. We'd like for the Viking to be a stronger counter to the units it's intended to fight. After this change, so they're increasing the health from 135 to 150, Vikings will generally take an additional shot to kill from Corruptors, Stalkers, and Tempests. Perhaps more importantly, it'll be more resilient against effects like Fungal Growth, Parasitic Bomb, and Psionic Storm, yeah. So for example, Parasitic Bomb here in this regard, the highest damage dealing spell to air, it deals 120 damage. So basically in the past, it would like leave the Vikings pretty much dead, and most of the time they would already be hurt a little bit. To right now, it's gonna be able to sustain a little bit more damage. Some concerns we have for this change include the strength of individual Vikings in the early game. I don't think that's much of a problem. The potency of timing pushes against Colossi in TVP, yes, that's definitely more of a problem, and the general power level in TVT, yeah. So TVT obviously already has a very big focus on air dominance because siege tanks can shoot away further than they can see, so air dominance is really critical. We'll also be careful to evaluate how impactful this change will be, considering other changes proposed, especially those involving the Infestor and Tempest, yeah. So generally speaking, right? I think if we imagine a perfect scenario for all three races, at this point in the meta, there is no denying that Zerg is just simply more powerful. If everyone plays perfectly, and we have been seeing this quite a bit at like the highest level of tournaments, so once again, I'm talking only like the tippity top, the cream of the crop, there's no denying that Zerg is a little bit more powerful than the other two races. I think changes like this, while they seem relatively minor, they certainly are going to be able to tip the scales just a little bit more towards balance. So I like this idea. There might just be some challenges with like early game, you know, Colossi timings and all that. But for the most part, I don't think this is going to be that big of a deal. And it's just going to make Terran a little bit more reliable, especially in the late game. I like it. Secondly, and this is a pretty cool one, the Medivac. Move the Rapid Reignition System upgrade, so that's the speed improvement upgrade, or like the cooldown reduction upgrade, from the Starport Tech Lab to the Fusion Core. So basically what it comes down to, and we can see this right here as well for the Liberator upgrade, for the Advanced Ballistics, they're moving a bunch of the upgrades from the Starport Tech Lab to the Fusion Core. Now, in addition to reducing the Medivac's Ignite Afterburner's cooldown by 5 seconds, this upgrade will also increase the Medivac base movement speed from 3.5 to 4.13. However, this upgrade will not affect Medivac's movement speed during the Ignite Afterburner's effect. Okay. So basically what this means is that the Medivac is gonna be a little bit more powerful later on into the game, but it's not gonna have the power spike quite as early. You're gonna have to tech up towards the Fusion Core and then also the upgrade itself. So that means that everything is gonna be delayed and getting the upgrade is gonna be a little bit more expensive. But obviously then once you're at Fusion Core, you can also make the switch towards Liberators and then also the Battlecruiser a little bit easier. So in general, I like this idea. I've always kind of felt like the upgrade is not that impactful. Giving the Medivacs a base movement speed that's faster seems like a good change to me, right? If you manage to get that upgrade out. So this is going to allow Terran a little bit more of a power spike in the later stages of the game. I think a lot of the times right now when you play Terran, there's these power spikes that you reach, especially when you finish like +1, +1, +2, +2, +3, +3. And then you kind of just sort of max out from there. And you don't really have those power spikes as much anymore, other than maybe Advanced Ballistics. I like the idea of having an additional layer to this in the later stages of the game, especially because right now what we see is when Terran bio maxes out, they will try and put on a lot of pressure and try to get that tempo advantage. And I think the tempo advantage can only become bigger when you're able to drop a little bit faster and get a little bit more mobility in your bio army without being forced to then transition towards necessarily like Ghosts or, for example, I don't know, Mass Liberator, or go back down to siege tanks or something along those lines. I like the idea of having an additional power spike a little while later into the game. So previous medevac upgrades have seen little use as they were viewed as unimpactful and at an awkward position at the Terran tech tree. Exactly. So it's going to be at the fusion core and it's going to be more powerful. Seems like a good idea to me. And then likewise for the Liberators, so advanced ballistics, that's the anti-ground ranged improvement to the Liberator. This one will be moved over to the Starport Tech Lab. Likewise, the transition to ranged Liberators can also be awkward, and in more than one matchup leads to a period of inactivity on the Terran's part. And actually, likewise as well, one thing to point out for these two in particular too that I just thought about, obviously you need a Tech Lab, right, previously on your Starport to research these two things. Right now, you don't necessarily need a Tech Lab, so you could go Reactor on the Starport, tech up towards the Fusion Core, and get your ranged upgrade for the Liberator. Might be a new build, right? Might be a new way of putting on some pressure. I like the idea a lot. So they are, however, changing the upgrade for... so it used to be 4 additional range. Right now, it's going to be 3 additional range. So we'd like to reduce the range of a few key units and abilities, including fully upgraded Liberators, in order to promote more unit interaction in the late game. This range reduction is meant to be viewed as a package with the change to Neural Parasite and the Tempest, as they are 2 units / abilities that often impact or interact rather with the Liberator. Okay, so this is a big one. This is by far the biggest change we've talked about so far. I mean, all of these obviously are nice. They're good quality of life improvements. I think this is actually a very impactful change. Advanced Ballistics is a key upgrade in the late game of Terran, and we're going to have to see how this plays out. I'm not sure how often it's really going to be relevant for Neural Parasite, but obviously for Tempest, yes, that's certainly the case. We don't really see Neural Parasite being utilized very often on Liberators. Yeah, on Tempest, that's going to make it's going to force the Liberators to be a little bit closer. And obviously, since there's going to be some changes to Neural Parasite and Tempest too, we'll have to see how that interaction will work out in the end. But I don't mind this being a little bit lower. I just wonder, right? I remember back in the day when the Queen got buffed up. I think it was primarily... I think they increased the range of the Queen from like 7 to 8, if I'm not mistaken. Primarily because of ranged Liberators. Maybe that means that they should move down the range of the Queen one again as well. Maybe that's actually in this list too. We'll see, but I don't think it is. Anyways, that might not be a bad idea. So far, I really do like all of these changes. I'm a big fan. Raven, interference matrix energy increased from 50 to 75, and then also the duration increased from 8 to 11. Okay, yeah, so Ravens, I saw someone comment a couple days ago, like, Loco, when do we ever see the Raven being utilized? Ravens are very popular in Terran versus Terran. In TVT, they are the end-all be-all unit, okay? They're phenomenal because you can disable your opponent's siege tanks and all kinds of other units. We sometimes see them as well in Terran versus Protoss, but not as often. So I do think this is going to be a good change for early game TVT. So leading into a low level of diversity in the matchup openers, yes. As interference matrix is key to the Raven's strength in TVT, we'd like to make some adjustments to divert its power from disabling siege tanks, as early game TVT encounters or engagements rather, are characterized by quick exchanges of tank volleys. We believe an energy cost increase in favor of increased durations would constitute a bigger change in TVT than the other matchups. I agree. And then also the base movement speed for the Raven is increased from 385 to 413. We'd like to place more of the Raven's power into the unit's body. When the Raven was potentially lethal with previous iterations of Hunter-Seeker Missile and Anti-Armor Missile, the slower movement speed was a necessary counterbalance. Now that the Raven occupies more of a support role, we believe it's no longer necessary to exercise such restraint. Yes, I like this. So once again, good set of changes. Okay, now here's one that I don't like. The Battlecruiser. As you may be aware, Battlecruisers over the last year have become a very, very popular unit in pretty much all matchups, but I would say especially in Terran versus Zerg, right? In Terran versus Zerg, we've been seeing Terran players go up towards very quick Battlecruisers, and apparently, and I haven't really encountered this too much myself on the ladder, but apparently Battlecruiser openers right now are still the standard over in South Korea on the ladder over there. People love the Battlecruiser openers, and for someone who has been playing StarCraft for like, I don't know, 9 years now. It's been like 9.5 years. I didn't see Battlecruisers ever, unless it was like a meme, you know, until like a year ago. I don't actually mind the position that the battlecruiser is in right now. Yeah, it's a pain in the butt to deal with, but it's also not that easy to execute. And if you're a really good Zerg player, I think you can deal with it. I think you can deal with it just fine. It's cool. Anyways, so here's what they're changing. Tactical jump now stuns and puts the battlecruiser into a 1-second vulnerability phase before it teleports. So basically what that means is that when it's trying to get out of trouble, it's not going to be able to do so as easily. While we enjoy the increased battlecruiser use over the last year, we think it's a bit too easy for them to escape unfavorable situations. So we'd like to make this change to encourage battlecruiser players to think twice before committing their fleet to a risky predicament. 1 second is a long time though. Like 1 second, say for example in the Terran versus Zerg early game, right? That's like the difference between like 5 additional queen shots, you know, if you have 3 queens. Okay, maybe not quite, but it's quite significant. I don't know if I like that too much. Likewise, we have an increase on the tactical jump cooldown. An alternate potential change we'd like to try is simply to increase the tactical jump's cooldown. I don't think tactical jump is too strong. Am I crazy? Which would temper its ability to constantly harass and perform hit-and-run tactics on enemies, especially in the late game. When considering options to tweak the battlecruiser, we're interested in some combination of the above 2 changes, but perhaps not both. Okay, fair enough. If I were to make a... Like, look, here's the thing, right? As a Zerg player at heart, yeah, this would obviously be great because it makes it easier for me to deal with battlecruisers. But do I think it's necessary? No. Yamato Cannon will no longer cancel itself if a target enters a transport or becomes cloaked or burrowed. Instead, the Yamato Cannon will miss and the ability will go on cooldown. So basically what that means right now, if say for example your opponent is going to go for a Yamato Cannon on a queen and you quickly burrow the queen, then the Yamato Cannon misses. I like that. So that's cool, right? That allows for a little bit of counterplay. I don't think these 2 right here at the top are necessary. I think they're basically... I mean, if you want to do a cooldown increase, whatever, but I don't think it's necessarily the biggest deal, to be completely honest with you. I think Yamato Cannon, though, having some counterplay, that's a cool thing, right? Having more unit interaction pretty much always seems like a good idea. What might not be a terrible idea, though, in that scenario is maybe reducing the cooldown on Yamato Cannon a little bit. I'm not sure. Okay, so this next one is a bit of a meme. I saw a lot of people getting very confused about this change. The duration of the mule increase or decrease rather from 64 to 63 seconds. It's like, wait, it's 1 second lower? After this change, mules will still mine the same amount of minerals if left undisturbed. However, they will no longer expire while holding minerals from certain patches. Mules now always attempt to spawn on the side of minerals closest to a town hall. A town hall? I have never seen anyone refer to a command center as a town hall. Maybe they were accidentally playing Warcraft 3 or something when they were testing out mules. They don't have mules over there. They have militia. SCVs can also attack, I guess. But anyways, this general quality of life change also helps undisturbed mules always mine their maximum potential. Okay, so here's what happens sometimes, right? When you drop a mule on one of the mineral patches, it will return minerals back and forth. And then when it's about to expire, it will mine minerals... and then break down halfway when returning the resources to the command center, to the town hall, I guess. What happens in that case is those minerals literally disappear. It's like I don't know, the money laundering of StarCraft 2 or something. Nobody knows where those minerals go. Okay, so if a mineral, or rather if a mule mines out, right, he times out rather, while mining and having resources with it, it won't actually return any of those resources and they basically just disappear. So this is just a nice quality of life improvement because apparently 63 seconds makes it fine, makes it okay. I would be okay as well with making this 65 seconds, I guess, if that allows it to finish its trip, or maybe 66 seconds. I wouldn't necessarily mind that either, but if 63 is the magic number, seems like a good call to me. So overall, gotta say, really like these changes to Terran. I think they're a lot of fun. And in general, there's some good quality of life improvements. More micro-ability, more counterplay, more beefiness in general, more power spikes in the late game, and then more maneuverability. It seems like a good set of changes. Obviously, like I pointed out, there's some that I don't like here, like especially like the battlecruiser tactical jump changes. I don't think they're necessary. But other than that, yeah, seems like a good set of changes. But obviously, on the whole, relatively minor. Okay. Now, next up, we have probably the most controversial unit in StarCraft 2 as we go over the Zerg changes. we have the Infestor. Now, at the late game, right, or in the late game, rather, at the highest level of play, Infestors certainly are too powerful, right? I think we can all agree on that right now. They are extremely powerful, and one of the reasons why Zerg are so hard to beat defensively, and why you are essentially forced, if you're a Protoss or a Terran player for that matter, to play late game, right? Infested Terrans, and also just the Infestor in general, are just extremely good defensively. So here's what they're changing. Infested Terran cost increased from 25 energy to 50. Infested Terran health goes up from 50 to 75. And the egg health also goes up from 70 to 75. Infested Terran Gauss rifle damage increased from 6 to 12. Infested Terran infested rocket damage, that's their anti-air, increased from 14 to 24. Infested rockets now gain +2 air weapon upgrades from +1. And infested rockets attack period decreased from 114 to 095. So basically what this means is that it's a complete redesign of the Infested Terran, right? So we'd like to redesign the Infested Terran with the following goals in mind. First, to make each Infested Terran feel more like a commitment. Secondly, we want to provide players with a more clear counterplay against Infested Terrans. Our proposal is a more expensive and powerful Infested Terran that is still vulnerable to key Terran and Protoss units and abilities. And with this redesign, while Infested Terrans will have a higher damage density, they'll be more vulnerable to Psionic Storm, Disruptors, and Liberators. Now this right here especially has caused a lot of people to get very upset. A lot of people read this as a buff to the Infested Terran. Now I can't help but notice that this is not a buff to the Infested Terran. Yeah, maybe in a straight up engagement, when it's like pure Skytals versus pure Infested Terran, maybe in that sense of the word, it's gonna be a slight advantage because obviously they will deal more damage. But that never really happens at higher level play. There's always gonna be a maxed out Skytals army with High Templar mixed into the army composition as well, right? So if you manage to land a good Psionic Storm on some of these Infested Terrans, they're gonna melt, and at that point the Infestors are gonna be out of energy. They're gonna take 25 seconds longer to regenerate that energy until they can once again cast an Infested Terran egg, when you compare it to the current patch. I can see this as more of like, once again, a set of changes where Zerg can't just sort of spray a whole bunch of Infested Terrans and just force you to back off. Instead, this now forces Zerg to be more cautious when using the spell, and it allows counterplay as well. And then, obviously, if Zerg makes a mistake, it makes it easy for the opponent to now punish that mistake, because Infestors won't have any energy left over, right? So right now, for example, we oftentimes see Infestors walking around with the ability to cast 6 Infested Terrans. I mean, 6 or 7, not that crazy. In the next patch, obviously, there's going to be less Infested Terrans just because of the energy increase, but also because you are not very likely to round it off at 25. I can imagine this is a really cool set of changes. And once again, this may be a little bit of Zerg bias for me. That's going to allow you to punish a player that's making mistakes more easily. And it's also going to allow you to be more tactical with the use of Infested Terrans, rather than just sort of be like that growling dog where you spray a bunch of Infested Terrans and you growl to try and force the player to back off. I like this. Now, a potential result of this is that Zergs will just simply go for even more Infestors. So, if you can't win with 20 Infestors, what about 30? That might be a little bit of a thing we have to keep in mind, but I think in general, I mean, the design philosophy around this makes a lot of sense. So yeah, this is cool. So here's another change that people are a little bit triggered by, and we probably need to read these two at the same time. So first off, remove the Research Neural Parasite upgrade. Infestors now come with Neural Parasite by default. And Neural Parasite range decreased from 9 to 8. Now, I've been calling for this one for a while. I think 9 range is too much. It makes the Neural Parasite too powerful of an ability. Yeah, I think that's a really good set of changes, or a really good change in general. This one right here, obviously, is a little bit more experimental. So when Infestors come pre-installed with Neural Parasite, right? What that means is you could go ahead and counter 2 base Protoss all-ins while using Neural Parasite to get your opponents Immortals. I think that's going to be an actual option. I think that's going to be something that Zergs can try and pull off, right? Now, I saw someone on the internet, and I tweeted about this as well, and then I removed the tweet because I felt like a bit of a jerk, but I can't help but bring it up. This is what was upvoted on Reddit for some reason. Someone mentioned, yeah, in the next patch, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but in the next patch, people are gonna be able to counter my 16 Marine drop with Neural Parasite. It's like, no. 16 Marine drop is supposed to hit at the 5-minute mark, maybe 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Neural Parasite and Infestors in general do not even come remotely into play at that point in the game. Like, that's literally minutes later. These are the kind of changes that will very much so affect players at the highest level. And I don't even include myself in that, right? Like, I'm like a top 1,000 player any day, I guess. And if I practice real hard, I guess it's like top 500 player. I don't think these changes would affect me very much. So, considering there's like, Blizzard mentioned in the past, there's like millions of people, I think it's like 2 million people playing per season on the ladder in StarCraft 2. The vast majority of people will never really get like any issues with this. I really want to look at this from the perspective of like the highest level of play and all of the games that I've casted and watched. I can imagine this change right here is great. I can imagine this change right here will allow for more counterplay, but it shouldn't be that big of a deal for most people that play on the ladder, right? Now, obviously, the one change that this may very well also bring is that it's going to allow more counterplay to the Battlecruiser, right? So that's one of the reasons why I don't enjoy the change to Tactical Jump here as much, because effectively speaking, removing the Neural Parasite upgrade and just giving Infestors Neural Parasite by default gives this, or makes this rather, a great counterplay to the Battlecruiser already as well, right? So yeah, I do think that this change alone would already give Zerg more than enough counterplay to deal with Battlecruiser if they really want to go ahead and go in that direction. It's going to obviously reduce the cost of the upgrade because it's no longer an upgrade, and it's going to also reduce the amount of time it takes to get the Neural Parasite upgrade out in the first place. Yeah, I like this. I think it's a good set of changes, but once again, maybe that's a little bit of Zerg bias shining through. But I do think this is certainly a step in the right direction, but I think it might be too much with then also the Terran nerfs that we discussed a little bit earlier. For one, I remember a game on Xel'Naga Caverns. I don't know who it was playing on the Protoss end, but it was Idra versus a Protoss. And Idra figured out a way to counter Protoss timing attacks. I think this was like a one-base push that was happening at the time. Zergs didn't know how to deal with it by going Neural Parasite and Zerglings. And he basically took the Immortals, and the Immortals killed the opponent's Stalkers. I still remember the game. I don't know if anyone else does, but I thought it was such a wicked way of playing. And well, they removed that obviously after some time, but I do think it's a cool way of opening up, and it may very well allow Zerg to go up towards Lair Tech, and then not necessarily go straight to Hive, not necessarily go into Hydralisk or Spire or whatever, but instead just go in Infestors and play Infestors as a tier 2 unit for a little while. I think it's a cool idea. I think it's a really cool idea. I'm just a little bit worried what it could look like if you get 30 of them in the late game and everything just sort of dies. Okay. Now, this is once again one. I saw Cyril tweeting about this one. He thought this was a pretty exciting one. Okay, the Lurker. Lurkers are in an awkward spot. We only ever see Lurkers in Zerg vs. Zerg if it goes past the Ling Bane into the Roach Ravager, into the Hydra, into eventually the Lurker phase. That's when we see Lurkers, because they absolutely shut down Roach play, units that are armored. And we also do see the Lurker quite a bit in Zerg vs. Protoss, but that really was true mostly a half year ago. I haven't seen a lot of Lurker play at high level recently. So here's what we got. The Lurker Den, build time decreased from 86 to 57 seconds. Good. Upgrades, or rather the Lurker Den build time takes forever. It's too long of a structure to reliably stop any timing attacks with. So I think this is a great chance, a great choice to change. Lurker range decreased from 9 to 8. So they're not going to have as much range anymore. That right now means that in the mid game, Lurkers are going to be outranged by, for example, Colossus, okay? Colossi also have 9 range with the extended thermal lens upgrade. Lurkers are going to have only 8 range. Now here's an interesting one, and this one comes from, I think, the campaign and obviously also co-op. Seismic Spines as a new upgrade at Hive Tech. This increases the Lurker's range from 8 to 10. That's an interesting one right there. That is an interesting one. This may very well make the Lurker a viable late-game unit. Because 10 range outranges a lot of units. Like, this certainly is going to open up the possibility to maybe not necessarily use Brute Lords as the end-all be-all ground unit counter, but to instead give that choice to the Lurker as well, right? I mean, right now, if there's enough Brute Lords at play, that's the moment where the Terran Protoss, and then also, I guess, maybe the Zerg, although that's not as relevant, because in Zerg vs. Zerg, you still have Vipers. But anyways, let's talk about Zerg vs. Terran and Zerg vs. Protoss here for a second. The Brute Lord really is the end-all, be-all unit that allows Zerg to shut down ground armies, right? Maybe the Lurker is going to be able to take some of that weight as well. It would be very cool to see. I wonder how this would play out, especially in Zerg vs. Protoss. Might be a little bit too much in ZVP. I'm also curious how this would play out in Zerg vs. Terran. We've never really seen Lurkers against Terran, but maybe this is going to be an option against bio armies in the late game. And maybe even a mech. I mean, obviously Siege Tank, they still outrange Lurkers quite a bit at 13 ranged while they're sieged up. But at the very least, it's gonna, it's gonna make this a little bit interesting. It also now apparently has an increased research duration for adaptive talents. That's the burrow improvement upgrade for the Lurker from 54 to 57. Our first try, okay, yes, we'd like to smooth out the transition to Lurkers. Yes, I like that. While at the same time lowering their initial strength to smooth out the power curve as a concern for Lurker-based timings. We'd also like to add a late-game upgrade geared towards fighting Immortal Templar-based Protoss ground armies. Cool. Finally, increasing the research duration of adaptive talents brings it more in line with other upgrades in the game. Why is it 57 seconds? I always find this such a... Can we just make it 60 seconds? Just make it... Like, all of the upgrades that are 50 seconds... Can we just make it 60 seconds? Just like we did with Stimpack, it went from 121 to 100. Can we all just make it a nice round number? It would make me happy. I don't mind either way. Like, it's 3 more seconds, whatever, but... Okay. Recently, there was a bug that was discovered about the Brute Lord, where Brute Lords actually effectively have 12 range, rather than their intended 10. Basically what you could do, you could like attack move onto a unit and then move the Brute Lord back, and what would happen is that the little Brute Lings would be able to move forward in front of the Brute Lord and then leash from that position from 10 ranged. Essentially what that meant is that if you microed Brute Lords very well, you could get 12 range out of them rather than the intended 10. So they say, without getting too deep into the weeds, the Brute Ling's current 12 leash range allowed the Brute Lord to attack from 30... Oh, it was even 13 range. Okay, with an attack click order. By reducing leash range to 9, the Brute Lord will always be limited to 10 range regardless of command. Makes sense to me. Okay, another very controversial structure, I guess, right now, and one that we've been seeing a lot over the last year. We saw it a lot, for example, in the GSL Grand Finals very recently, at the COTAS Finals, Rogue versus Trap, and we've been seeing it a lot in general. It's the Nidus Network. Nidus Network is, simply put, too powerful. I think we can all agree on the fact that it's too powerful. Nidus Network and Nidus Worm initial unload delay increased from 0.18 to 0.13. 0.36. Nidus Network and Nidus Worm load period also increased. Nidus Network and Nidus Worm unload period also increased. New upgrade found in the evolution chamber called secreted coating. Reduces the Nidus Network initial... Okay, so this basically brings it back to its original values. This requires Hive Tech. And basically what it comes down to right now is that the Nidus Network is going to be a good late game tool, but it's not going to be very good as a timing attack anymore. Also because of this second set of changes. So summon the... Oh, I guess it's only a single change, not a set. But anyways, summon Nidus Worm ability cooldown increased from 0 seconds to 14. Meaning that you are not going to be able to spam the Nidus Worm like you currently can. When the one finishes, immediately it goes into the second one. That's no longer going to be a thing. It's going to be 14 seconds instead. I've got a feeling that this is a classic Blizzard nerf, where it's a double-sided nerf. We've seen this a lot in the past, where rather than just nerfing a unit, or a structure in this case, we see 2 nerfs on one unit instead. I always kind of feel like that's unnecessary. One nerf at a time usually is the better way to go. Now, obviously, this is going to be during the time period after BlizzCon wraps up, where there's going to be a little bit of time, I guess, a couple of months to potentially scale it back in another direction. I kind of feel like this upgrade over here and this change over here isn't necessary if this one over here is at play, right? Like, if there's a 14-second cooldown, that's massive. That hurts so much already. And I feel like both of these changes are primarily catered towards making the Nidus network no longer a timing attack-focused structure, but more something that's going to be helpful to use in the late game. So I feel like both of these address the same issue, and it's very much so unnecessary in my opinion. I think you could go and just remove this whole set of changes and just make the ability cooldown increase from 0 to 14. I think that would be more than enough. Yeah, so they write a whole long story about it as well. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, right? I think this is a double nerf. Double nerfs, I'm never a big fan of them. It's the same for like double buffs. I feel like double buffs may also be a little bit too much. Alrighty, so here we have the Protoss. Overall, by the way, quick recap right here of the Zerg. I like the idea of making Lurkers more of a viable unit. I like the idea of changing the Infestor quite a bit as well. Neuroparasite range decrease makes a lot of sense. Infested Terran, I guess we're going to have to figure out how that's going to play out in the actual game. But giving Zerg more like lair tech possibilities than both the Lurker and then a power spike once again for Lurkers at Hive Tech, and then also for the Infestors, more of like a Lair Tech to Hive Tech, power spike. I like that. I think it's good. I think it's fun. I'm just a little bit worried that Infestors might still be too powerful, because Zergs might just simply settle down on making as many of them as possible and not really worry about anything else anymore. But other than that, I think the nerfs are appropriate, and I think it makes sense. I'm just a little bit worried about the Nidus network getting double nerfed. That seems unnecessary. Okay. So here we go. Protoss changes. The Oracle, the Sentry, and the Void Ray fixed an issue where beam attacks could deal more damage than intended. Now, I love the fact that they added the Sentry to that mix. It's like, do you remember the last time someone was complaining about the Sentry being too powerful of a unit? It's like, no, that's a tickle beam at best, right? So with this change, players will no longer be able to micro these units to deal unintended extra damage to a single target. However, these units will still retain their previous behavior in all situations. I gotta be honest with you, I'm not even entirely sure what this extra micro is. I just know that Oracles and Void Rays seem to be fine in my opinion right now. And if this is gonna nerf them, I don't think that's necessary. If this now means that Oracles are gonna need to take another hit to, for example, finish off a drone or a probe or an SCV, that'd be awful. That'd be really bad. Void Rays already are kind of terrible units as it is in the game. Nobody really makes them above, well, I obviously cast the game very recently, where we did have a Protoss going for Void Rays in the late game, and I really liked it. We'll go over another change with the Void Ray in just a second. But I'm a little bit worried that Oracle Time Rings are now going to be less powerful, just because they fixed an issue where the beam attack could deal more damage than intended. I don't know if that's going to be... It's not very specific, right? But I hope that it's not going to allow an extra set of hits on every single unit that an Oracle tries to kill. That would be awful. All right, Zealots. And this is a big one. This is one that we speculated about a couple months ago. So the charge upgrade no longer provides Zealot with +8 damage on impact. There's a new upgrade in the Twilight Council called Sundering Impact that grants them this change instead. You need to have charge in order to research this upgrade. It costs 100 seconds to research, and it's also 100 minerals and 100 gas. Basically what this means right now is that you have the Zealot in its vanilla form, then it's going to be a Zealot with charge, and then it's going to be a Zealot with, after you get the charge upgrade, with the Sundering Impact ability that's going to allow it to deal +8 damage to enemies on impact. I've talked about this in the past. I've never really been a big fan of the fact that Zealots deal +8 damage on impact. So the way it works is that they charge at a target. Like currently, this is how it works in the game, right? They charge at a target, they deal 8 damage on impact, and then they hit twice immediately. Meaning that whenever charge comes off cooldown, there's a massive power spike for the Zealots, and once charge is researched, there's a big power spike there as well. We believe the power spike gained from researching the charge upgrade could be a bit too high for its cost and comes a bit too early in the game. I can imagine this is the case. It's going to primarily affect 2 base Protoss timing attacks in Protoss versus Zerg, and then also probably 3rd base timings actually in Protoss versus Terran, where Terrans are going to actually be able to put on some more pressure here because it's just so difficult to use Marines, even with like the new Stimpack improvements, right? To use Marines to try and counter a 3rd. I don't mind this set of upgrades. I just, or rather, I don't mind this change. I just don't know if that needs to be an upgrade. Like, I feel like, just like with the Evolution Chamber upgrade right over here, right? Secreted Coating and then Sundering Impact. Do we really need that? Do we really need an additional upgrade? Like, one of the things that I really like about StarCraft 1, for example, is just the simplicity. It's very clear what every unit does. I don't know if we need like an extra upgrade in the Twilight Council that's going to be researchable after you get yourself charged. Maybe just make this and make it so that Zealots deal +2 damage on impact, or maybe even +4 damage on impact. But I don't know if we need an extra upgrade for that. Just my 2 cents. I mean, it's got to be fine either way, but yeah. Okay, so the Adept. Adept health increased from 70 to 80. Adept shield decreased from 70 to 60. New upgrade found in the Twilight Council called Amplified Shielding. And yes, that with Charge, the Glaive upgrade, Blink, that also Amplified Shielding, Sundering Impact, would make 5 freaking upgrades in one structure. That's 5 upgrades in the Twilight Council. So if you ever scout a Protoss going for a Twilight Council, God only knows what they're getting. Adept health increased from 70 to 80. Adept shields decreased from 70 to 60. New upgrade on the Twilight Council called Amplified Shielding increases the Adept shields from 60 to 80. And once again, 100, 100, 100. In the recent past, we've been very careful at managing the strength of the Adept due to its historical potential when paired with Phoenixes in TVP. Now that the Terrans have a clear and powerful counter to Adepts in the form of EMP, we feel more confident that we can safely scale this unit a little bit into the mid to late game. So I'll be honest with you, I have not seen Adepts, other than like the first or maybe the second one, in any game of StarCraft, really. Like, I mean, people basically have replaced the Adept with the Zealot entirely. And I've said this ever since like they first introduced the Adept. I always kind of felt like it had a lot of overlap with the Zealot in the first place. I mean, it had a different movement spell, I guess, and that's all fine and dandy. When I think of like, so say for example, they were to ever produce a StarCraft 3, right? If you were to ask me, do they want to take the Zealot into StarCraft 3? Yeah, or StarCraft 3? Yeah, definitely. Do we want to take an Adept into StarCraft 3? Not necessarily, right? Like, I feel like Adepts are not that exciting of a unit. For all I care, they could, like, get rid of the unit and add something new. I wouldn't necessarily mind that, because, I mean, Adepts are, they feel more like a cheesy unit and more like a weaker Zealot while being cheaper than a Zealot. If that makes sense. Like, you can obviously do all kinds of timing attacks, and there have been some builds in the past, and maybe there's going to be builds again in the future that will change my mind on this. But I've always kind of felt like the Adept is not that exciting of a unit. It's going to be a good scouting tool in the early game for Protoss, obviously, because they can figure out roughly what's going on and stuff. But it's, like, let's be honest, nobody loves the Adept, right? Like, you can have a Zealot tattooed on your shoulder and be badass, but nobody is going to have an Adept tattooed on their shoulder, right? Maybe? I don't know. Anyways, once again, an extra upgrade for a unit that's currently underperforming. Don't mind it necessarily. I just don't know if I want to see 5 upgrades in the Twilight Council. I'm okay with them just increasing the health of the units from 70 to 80 and just leaving the shields as it is, 70, and just increase it by 10 hit points and just get rid of this upgrade as well. I feel like that would be much more straightforward. Yeah, so with the previous 2 changes, our goal is to bring the Zealot and Adept together as a more comparable option for a core mid-game unit. The issue is, though, Adepts cost gas, and Zealots don't. So when you're making Zealots, you can still get Storm and Archons and, like, anything else. Zealots are a great way of dumping your minerals. Adepts still cost gas, and they are more of, like, a commitment. And maybe I'm mistaken, right? Maybe this upgrade will change everything and will make the Adept more of a core unit, but Charge is just so nice because it tanks a lot of the damage and it's going to allow, you know, your Zealots to really be the front line. Adepts are also, I guess, front line, but they also are further towards your actual spellcasters and stuff, and that's not really where you want the opponent to engage. Like, you want them fighting as far away as possible. I feel like in that very base like differences between the Zealot and the Adept, I still feel like the Zealot is always going to be a better choice, and the Adept is in a bit of a weird spot. Like, the Adept is kind of like a Reaper, you know what I mean? Like, you make a couple maybe, but that's kind of it, right? And I don't mind it necessarily. it just feels a little bit redundant, right? Like they don't have a very clear place in the game. Other than scouting and early game defense, which may be enough, but I don't know. This feels a little bit forced. Okay. Almost spilled water all over myself. Observer. Movement speed decreased from 3.01 to 2.63, and gravitic booster upgrades now increases the movement speed by 131, down from 151. This feels like an unnecessary change to me as well. We'd like to revert this change we made earlier this year, as we feel the frustration caused by barely not catching observers that did not make up for the benefits of the speed increase. I disagree. I flat out disagree. I know there's some players that might not be able to catch observers, but, just get good. Come on, dude, like, why? This is unnecessary. Come on, this is not necessary. Let's be real. I don't mind observers being able... Like, Protoss doesn't have that great of a scouting set of tools, right? I mean, Zerg literally has creep and overlords, right? Terran obviously has the scans, and they generally speaking are more active out on the map with medivacs and all that, so they have more information. Protoss doesn't have that much scouting. I mean, you obviously have the Adept in the early game, you've got the observers, and then you got, like, oracles and stuff. But Protoss oftentimes can find themselves in the dark a lot more. I feel like, if anything, I would be okay with an observer buff, not an observer nerf. Okay. Now we have a couple of the big beefy boys. First off, we have a Void Ray. Now, it's funny, I talked about this, I think 2 or 3 days ago on the YouTube channel in my most recent cast of StarCraft 2. Increases the Void Ray's movement speed from 3.5 to 4.65. So this is an improvement to the Void Ray. Okay, so first off, right? Before we go over this, so increases movement speed, acceleration, and all that, right? Great. Void Rays are a weird unit. I know that if you play StarCraft 2 below, for example, Gold League, Void Rays are the most common Protoss air unit, right? People in 2v2, 3v3, 4v4 absolutely love Void Rays. But the higher you go up on the ladder, the worse a Void Ray is. That's not so much because the Void Ray is like a worse unit overall. It's just that the other options you can get, like for example, a Phoenix or an Oracle or a Tempest or a Carrier, right? Those are all superior because they have more micro potential and they're just simply more powerful. Void Rays are usually used at high level. Most of the time, unless like we're talking about that game I just referenced, and I'll go ahead and post a link to that game down below in the comments or in the description rather if you're interested. They usually are used more like, oh snap, my opponent is going for a roach all-in. Well, better make a Void Ray. Like that seems to be the general consensus on Void Rays. Or maybe they're like used as like a way of sniping overlords and being just a little bit more safe. I do like the idea of making this upgrade because it makes the Void Ray more of like a unit that can punish mistakes, right? Say you have Void Rays in the late game and your opponent is trying to retreat with Brute Lords because they overextended. Void Rays are going to be able to kill them easy, right? Because they're much faster. Likewise, though, I'm a little bit worried for people that play the ladder below Gold League and in multiplayer games of 2v2, 3v3, 4v4, because I feel like this is going to be pure Void Ray spam every single game, and then mass Flux Veints. Once again, there's so many counters to Void Rays. Like, players can definitely counter Void Rays just fine. But this is definitely going to allow Protoss to be a little bit more powerful in the late game. And this, in combination with the changes to the neural parasite and whatnot that we saw earlier already, may very well give Protoss that slight edge to bring it more in line with where Zerg is currently at in the late game. So this used to be an upgrade back in Winged Liberty, yeah. It was removed because it led to some undesirable game states, allowing Void Rays to easily maneuver into opponents' bases, where it could charge up and potentially camp indefinitely. The Void Ray was also disproportionately powerful at lower skill levels, and Flux Veints compounded this issue. Now that the Void Ray has an active Prismatic Alignment ability instead of the passive Prismatic Beams ability, it used to like charge up and become more powerful the longer it was attacking a unit. We feel more comfortable reintroducing Flux Veints in order to push the unit into a potentially new role. So I like the idea of this. I'm just a little bit worried for like lower level play. But once again, we want to balance the game from a pro level perspective, right? Like that seems to be the best way to go about things. All right, so the Tempest. Kinetic Overload, so that's the anti-air range, decreased from 15 to 14. So this is another change desired to rein in the ranges of key late game units in combination with the Liberator change. We believe this set of changes will retain the relationship between Liberators and Tempest while allowing lower tier units such as Stalkers and Vikings to interact more easily. Fair enough. Health increase from 150 to 200 and shields decrease. So they're going to be a little bit more tanky, a little bit less ranged. Relatively minor once again, but it makes sense. Like right now they can shoot away from like 2 screens. They're not going to be able to do so as easily next time around. And since Neural Parasite got reduced, and also obviously the Advanced Ballistics upgrade for the Liberators, I think this upgrade makes, or rather this change makes sense. And they're just going to be a little bit more beefy, especially against like EMP and whatnot. Alrighty, so the last one. Guys, we're always almost there. How long have I been going? I've been going for a while. By the way, I know people are going to ask. Is it going to focus? There you go. Ooh, I got a StarCraft water bottle. Look at that thing. That's sick, right? Anyways, the Mothership. Time Warp now affects air units in addition to ground units and buildings. Yes. So Time Warp, the big bubble, it now also reduces attack speed of units inside of the bubble. Previously only ground units. Now it's also going to be air units. Pretty straightforward. Okay. So I do like the majority of these changes. I do have a few concerns, primarily still with like late game play and also with mid game play right now for Protoss. So it seems like the amount of counters to mid game Protoss is going up, and like the power spikes of Protoss in mid game timing attacks is going down. I'm a little bit worried how Protoss is going to play this one out, because it feels like a lot of the pro games will likely allow Protoss, or force Protoss rather, to play that late game. It's a little difficult. I've been thinking about this a lot over the last couple of months. It's a little bit difficult to pinpoint exactly why that is and what kind of change they could bring into the game to make that better. But it seems like the vast majority of the super late game games, or late game games, that I've seen, they never really seem to go in favor of Protoss. Like, if you look at, like, most recent tournament results, right? Actually, let me go ahead and pull this up. All right, so these are the premier events for 2019 that have been played already. And then, obviously, right now, there's GSL Super Tournament that's still ongoing and the WCS Global Finals. It kind of feels like in a lot of those games, in a lot of those series, we had a late game Zerg versus Protoss that just really seemed heavily in favor of Zerg. And once again, there's only like a handful of Zerg players that can actually pull that kind of thing off. I'm curious what this is going to look like if this goes on for like another, say, 2 years with a similar late game, right? With a similar thing where Protoss is essentially forced to play late game. I've got a feeling that it's going to be harder and harder and harder for Protoss to win any tournaments. Maybe I'm mistaken, right? I would like to be wrong, but I'm a little bit worried about it. Likewise, right now, if you look on a Ligulek, the first Protoss that comes out in the current top 10 is Stats at position number 9. That's pretty crazy, right? I mean, I don't think the Protoss players are by default worse players than any of these other guys. It's just difficult to pinpoint exactly how you could make a change that would allow Protoss more, how do you say that? Like more reliability, I suppose, without being forced to go into the late game and without being forced to go 2-base all-ins. Anyways, that's just something to think about and something that may be able to be addressed with this newly announced set of balance changes. Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comment section of this video. I would love to read them. Please keep in mind that there's probably going to be some salty people in the comment section. Just because that's the nature of all of those videos. People pretty much always get a little bit triggered. Please don't engage in too much, you know, like sometimes I see people getting very frustrated and very aggressive in the comments on these kind of videos. I always try and focus on positivity and to try and make my YouTube channel and my Twitch live stream a fun place to hang out and a safe area, I suppose, to just simply comment on. So yeah, please don't be a jerk. That's the best advice I've ever given. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, hit that like button. If you want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get a notification as soon as I upload more. But for now, I want to thank you for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile alright, and I will see you once again in the next one.